So I'm going to speak a little bit this morning about how airports have changed, and things have changed in aviation. And I think that the airport has become a major public building in our society. And I think the image there of all the crowds that we see at the airport and a lot of the things that have been said this morning all relate to the fact that that is let's see. You sure this advances?
Yeah, you need to go down. Here with the arrow down.
Okay. And yeah, I think it's interesting to me as an architect looking at the airport as a building type to look back at other forms of public architecture. You know, what is public architecture? What defines it? For many of us, we look back at the antiquities and how people traveled was by foot or by sea. If you look at some of the buildings around the turn of the century that were public buildings, the airport did make its way in the 1920s, 30s, 37, LaGuardia. The train stations were very important in terms of public spaces for connectivity, as was mentioned. Today we have a big transformation going on in all forms of public architecture. We have, of course, we still have the old forms like the train station. Here you see Grand Central Station, but we also have courthouses that don't necessarily look like courthouses. The four columns are not there. We have museums that are not what one would think of as a museum. They are changing form. They look more like the pyramids, but it's crystalline, it's glass. We still have big warehouses of art and art forms in these kind of nondescript modern buildings. We have the historic library, and the library, I think, with the digital age has taken a tremendous hit in a sense of there are very few people in these buildings. The libraries are struggling now to get people in, and we're seeing it completely redefined. And I think the one there in Seattle is a prime example of the redefinition of the library. The stadiums today and yesterday are quite different. At least the games have changed. But we see a tremendous amount of things going on with architecture. They're much more complex, enormous investments in these facilities. Exhibit halls are changing from this one, which was a giant space in the 60s, to much bigger spaces, and they are the industry preferred by a lot of cities to get people to come to the downtowns. Airports have changed size to a scale that is almost unmanageable in some ways. Atlanta being what I call a big box airport. It is by far the most flights in the United States are in and out of Atlanta every day. It's all about efficiency. It's about efficiency for the airplane, not so much efficiency for and a kindness for the passenger necessarily. In Denver, the building there, the iconic structure, it made a statement when it was built that created something different about airports, saying it could be light and airy and fluffy and interesting, and create a sense of place, a relationship to its environment. And then that's a big change from what we saw with the way things were going with the Atlanta sort of diagram and layout for airports. So as architects, we ask ourselves questions like, why are we doing this? Does these airports, do they fit our philosophy? These are our 8 touchstones of design. to discover the natural order in buildings, to work with the context and create identity where we work so that our buildings do fit in and become a part of that place. We try to let the culture of the place guide the design, and we love to celebrate the entrance to buildings so that people know how to enter and where to go and can find their way around. And it's not so frustrating. Listening closely to the community, staying focused throughout the process, and restraining the ego, which is, nobody believes that, right? Nobody believes an architect could restrain his ego. But we try to do that as we embrace these kinds of problems, the airport, and redefining buildings, public buildings, and design them for people, because after all, that's who these buildings are for. They're for people. So in redefining buildings and creating new emphasis on what's inside them, we're looking for lots of different shapes and forms as architects, creating entrances for the buildings that are unmistakable, intriguing and exciting, and embodying things in the designs of the buildings that are better for people. And so I've shown you slides of things that are not airports, because these things where we're learning to borrow light, we take these into the design of airports and use what we learn to create better spaces for people. And so this space, which is a civic space, meant to create a space for people to engage in and be in a civic atmosphere, to see exhibits, and to interact with each other in the buildings, is the kind of things that we need to do in airports in the future to make them better for people. After all, that's why we all signed up for this, is to make the world a better place for people. So in the Los Angeles airport, you see many of you took a tour. How many were on the tour yesterday? So many of you took a tour of this and you got to experience it firsthand. And I think that some of the spaces that were created here are making it much better for people, services for people, and so on. The images of these buildings as gateways are different in different places and have different opportunities. And the key to creating buildings that are public is making them flexible, because these spaces, such as this one in Denver, are undergoing many transformations, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But I think that this building type is going to be the most important public piece of architecture in the 21st century. And one of the reasons that I believe that is because, and I'm sure we've all heard this and experienced it, because everybody is moving to the cities. The density in our cities is increasing, and the numbers of people that are traveling to and from these cities is increasing dramatically. And so we're expecting to see by 2050 around 9 billion people on the planet. That's a big increase. We've seen cities like this grow from 1981 to a very short time later in 2012, from just dirt roads to thriving metropolises. And we see this in the United States, of course, continuing to expand, but look at the overseas cities that are over 1 million people. So 161 in China and growing. Our world has changed dramatically with the iPhone, our ability to connect with each other, and you would think maybe we don't need to travel because of all of this, but we still like to be face-to-face with each other and share ideas and look each other in the eye and talk. And the consequence is that many of us' suitcases start to look this way. We look like road warriors that are making many, many trips and passages to different places. And so the cost of travel has come way down. it's come down to a point that it is very easy for people to travel. Some of the airlines, such as Southwest, are offering passage at a rate that many people are going to visit family and relatives much more frequently across the country. And so it is a dramatic thing that is taking place with the numbers of people that are flying. There are 1 million people in the sky as we're speaking right now. In 2016, there were over 7 billion people flying, and this year the number will be probably around 7.3 or 4 billion people annually flying. So for the architects, this passenger experience is something that is constantly discussed. It's discussed by people who operate airports, and there is a competition to do everything we can possible to make the passenger's experience the best possible in the airport and the most convenient possible. As we design these, we have lots of public meetings, so there are new players involved in helping design the airport, as there should be, taking surveys of what people like and want. There's lots of information that's coming forward to the designers in this process, and it is a very big process and a big undertaking today to design an airport. We have security issues, huge lines of people trying to get into the building. This is all going to change very shortly. A lot of drama has been taking place about this, and a lot of research is being done. And very soon, these lines are going to shorten because there is a lot of technology that has been developed and is being tested currently for you, which I'm sure you're all glad to hear about this. Security is paramount. The app technology is being harnessed in a way that will make this all much more simple for you as you travel through an airport. So we're under a lot of pressure as architects, to design buildings that are much more efficient and fluid and easy for you to travel through. Flexibility is one of the key things. This is a photograph of the Denver airport, and you can see under this big flexible space of the roof, many transformations are taking place. And this morning I had breakfast with a gentleman involved in a new transformation for this entire great hall space underneath the airport. There are many facilities underway in the United States, and they're all struggling with the same issue: how to make these spaces better for the public, more information, using artwork, daylight, making these spaces exciting for people. People are spending a lot more time in these spaces. They're spending around 2 hours on the average. So when you take 7 billion people times 2 hours, you can see it as a lot of time. So a lot of attention is being paid to make these spaces much better in terms of the quality of the space, the quality of light in the space, creating spaces that are easy to change and make them more flexible for people. And it's the key to making these buildings last longer. As an architect, we are brought in sometimes to take down one of these buildings that's only been up for 25 years because it was so rigid, it didn't work so well. So making them convenient and easy to use, flexible, giving people what they need, such as here, power, getting power to the seats, a place to rest, a place to put their cup, a place to plug in and charge their devices is essential to people that are traveling today. And they're little things, they're small things, but also making spaces that are more cozy and warm for people is very important. And we're seeing the things inside the building dramatically change for services. People are doing things in the airport and spas, haircuts, manicures, and of course this would have been outlawed, or was outlawed, just 30 years ago, bringing your pet to the airport, but this is the new wave. of trying to make the passenger comfortable and making it a friendly place. We're seeing all sorts of things like activities here of bringing culture in, crafts, teaching people to use things. And now we're embarking on something that's about to happen. I call it mega airports, the big airports of the future. Of course, we think LAX is big, we think Denver is big, but in the future, we're going to see a whole series of new airports. They're completing right now in Istanbul, one of the largest airports in the world, and it is continuing. And since I'm out of time, I'll just kind of flip through the photographs, and you can take a look at these massive projects that are underway around the world. And one thing that's common in all of these is much bigger, larger, indoor public spaces. Spaces that are bigger than we would have thought of years ago. Spaces that are large enough that we can put other facilities inside of them. Spaces that we thought were big in the past. So they are, because there are these very large public spaces, that's bigger gathering spaces, much more opportunity for the public in the future. So the world has become a much smaller place. Thanks.